You know, there's a timeless question in history. When does an alliance, one formed for mutual protection, turn into an empire built on force? It's a tricky line to see, but for ancient Athens, we can almost pinpoint the exact moment. And it's all in the stories of two islands, Naxos and Thasos. Their rebellions show us, step by step, how a league of friends was hammered into an empire of subjects.
So here's how we'll break it down. First, we'll look at the original promise of the Delian League. Then, we'll see the first crack appear with the Revolt of Naxos and watch things escalate, big time, with Thasos. After that, we'll compare the two revolts side by side to really see the pattern. And we'll finish with a fantastic little twist, a secret promise from Sparta that basically foreshadowed the massive war to come.
Alright, so let's set the stage. We're fresh off the heels of the epic Persian Wars. The Greek city-states are feeling united, but also pretty nervous. Their main goal? Make sure that never, ever happens again. And that led to a big promise of protection. And out of that came the Delian League, founded around 478 BC. The idea was actually pretty simple. It was meant to be a voluntary club. Athens would lead, and everyone would pool their resources, either contributing ships or just chipping in some cash to keep the Persian threat away for good. It was supposed to be a classic mutual defense pact, built on everyone working together. But, and this is the absolute core of our story today, what started as a promise, well, it didn't stay that way for long. This voluntary alliance for mutual defense pretty quickly morphed into something else entirely, a compulsory organization that was really all about Athenian domination. So, how did that happen? It all starts with one island deciding it wanted out.
And that brings us to our first case study, the island of Naxos. This revolt, which went down around 470 BC, became the very first real test of what the Delian League had actually become.
If you think about it from Naxos' perspective, their reasoning was pretty straightforward. The Persian threat, it seemed to be fading into the rearview mirror. So why keep paying dues for a club they didn't feel they needed anymore? They weren't trying to overthrow Athens or anything so dramatic. They just wanted to secede. They wanted to leave. And that challenged the whole idea of the league.
And the great historian Thucydides, who was writing about all this, he saw this as the moment, the exact point where everything changed. When he says the original constitution was broken, he's telling us that the unwritten rule of you can leave when you want had just been completely shattered. Athens' response was, well, it was swift and it was brutal. They didn't send a letter. They attacked their own ally. They besieged the city and literally forced it back into the league. The message couldn't have been clearer, and it was a message that would ring out across the entire Aegean Sea. Membership is no longer optional. Okay, fast forward just a few years to 465 BC. Another island, Thasos, decides to defy Athens. But this wasn't just Naxos 2.0. Oh no. This was a brutal escalation that really ripped the mask off and showed Athens' true imperial ambitions. See, unlike Naxos, Thasos didn't revolt because they were tired of paying dues. Their fight was sparked by a direct economic conflict. It was about cold, hard cash. Athens was starting to move in on their control of some super valuable markets and gold mines on the mainland. So this wasn't about alliance duties. This was about Athens stepping on an ally's economic turf. And the Athenian response this time? It was absolutely ferocious. I mean, just look at this. The siege of Naxos was one thing, but Athens laid siege to Thasos for 3 long years. This wasn't just a punishment anymore. This was a clear signal that Athens would fight a prolonged, costly war to protect its own financial interests. And the punishment after Thasos finally surrendered? Wow, it was just systematic destruction. Athens didn't just force them back into the league, they completely dismantled them. They tore down their city walls, took their entire navy, forced them to pay a huge fine, and then, the final insult, they confiscated the very mines and markets that started the fight in the first place. This was total subjugation. So when you put these two revolts right next to each other, a really clear and frankly disturbing pattern starts to emerge. You can see Athenian aggression just ramping up. The differences are just stark, aren't they? Naxos tried to leave the club, Thasos fought over money. Athens told Naxos to get back in line, but they responded to Thasos by systematically disarming them and just taking their stuff. The significance here is what's absolutely crucial. Naxos established the precedent that you can't leave. But Thasos established a whole new precedent that Athens would utterly ruin an ally to protect its own bottom line. So that's really the heart of it. It's this progression from coercion to just outright imperial exploitation. Naxos was about enforcing membership. Thasos was about enforcing economic dominance, even if it meant destroying an ally's freedom and wealth. The friendly mask was completely off.
But hold on, there is one more incredible layer to the story of Thasos, an explosive secret that involved Athens' great rival, Sparta, and it gives us this terrifying sneak peek into the future of Greece.
So, picture this. During that desperate 3-year siege, the Thasians reached out to Sparta for help. And according to our main source, they got a secret promise back that Sparta would actually invade Athens' homeland to save them. But was that promise real?
Well, Thucydides is pretty explicit about it. He says, yep, the Spartans secretly promised to invade Athenian territory, and the only thing that stopped them was a catastrophic earthquake that hit Sparta, which was followed by a massive revolt of their enslaved population, the Helots.
But modern historians, they look at this and they're pretty skeptical, and for some really good reasons. For one, Athens and Sparta were still technically allies at this point. In fact, Sparta would soon ask Athens for help with that very same Helot revolt. Also, a massive earthquake is a very, very convenient excuse, isn't it? A lot of scholars think this story might just be later Spartan propaganda to explain why they sat back and did nothing while Athens got more and more powerful.
But here's the key takeaway. Whether the promise was real or just a rumor, the story itself is incredibly revealing. It shows that this deep, corrosive distrust was already festering between the two great powers of Greece. The whole affair over Thasos exposed the tensions that would, just a handful of years later, explode into the devastating Peloponnesian War.
So in the end, the story of Naxos and Thasos is so much more than just ancient history. It forces us to ask this timeless and honestly pretty unsettling question about power. At what point does a nation that promises to protect you cross that invisible line and become a ruler that simply demands your obedience?